We did really talk about the Remembered Event essay, which was the first essay that you did, and most of you have done a wonderful job. Talking about the role of women and the ways in which basically we approach society and the mainstream society approaches us. I recall a particular event about the transformative role that women, in my case, my mother played in my life. I speak Kurdish as my mother tongue. I was born and raised in Iran, in Western Iran. I did not really know anything about other peoples or languages. I just knew that I was basically Kurdish until I went to primary school, and it was only then that I was exposed to a different basically language and a different culture. Now, I found it very shocking because, you know, I was attending a school in which the teacher and the students were Kurdish, but they had to learn a foreign language, and that was Farsi or Persian, the official language of Iran. And definitely, it was really an appalling and shocking experience for me. It was traumatic to the extent that I dropped out of school during the first or the second week of classes. It was very unpleasant. It really created a sense of imprisonment for me. So I refused to go back to school. I remember, as a matter of fact, we didn't have electricity then, that my mother would lie down and the flickering light of a lantern that we had, and she would painstakingly, laboriously copy the characters of the Persian-Arabic alphabet so that I would go back to school. This was the first actually grade, and I was, if I'm not mistaken, 6 years old. And this is what, about 60 years ago, a bit more. I would assume, not to reveal my age. So when I went back to school, obviously I could not reproduce what my mother had created. And then I was subjected to summary, basically, punishment, in a way, corporal punishment of various kinds. The one that I remember, and probably it was not as harsh as the other ones, was basically to hold up some books over my head.
Gosh.
And to just stand on one foot, just, you know, like this. And the teacher basically continued teaching, and I was basically kept in that condition, no matter how short it was. It was definitely
Appetizing.
like infinity. It took forever. Now, what I thought, basically, this was horrendous, so I decided not to go back to school. Now, I knew instinctively that my mother was illiterate. She didn't know how to read and write, but she was copying, as a matter of fact, the Persian-Arabic characters. I knew that she was really copying, and that was what was expected of me, and I could not really do that. And that's why I decided, you know, I didn't want to experience physical punishment of that kind, embarrassment, shame, all that. And of course, it was culturally and linguistically very different. And I didn't know that this was really a kind of a pathway for me for social mobility, that literacy was offered in a foreign language to me. It was only the coaxing of a teacher, a family friend that we had, that forced me, really coaxed me, I should say, going back to school. So when I learned basically how to read and write in Persian, I would say my first teacher was my mother. And she didn't even know how to read and write. And it was this really commitment that she had to my schooling that really paved the way for my socialization into Persian as a foreign language and to learn how to read and write it. And I never forget really the first experience of learning how to read and write, rather than read, how to write. Any act of actually writing is the act of reading as well. That my mother played such an important role in my education. And I'm telling this story, you know, with fond, really memories, but it was a traumatic experience. But it made me aware how to stand up for my rights, linguistic and cultural rights, that I was definitely deprived of as a child. So when I wrote my dissertation, as a matter of fact, I began with this story of the courage that my mother basically had. Not only that, but the encouraging courage in me basically to go to school and not to give up. And I would say she was really the teacher that had the most enduring effect on my life and in deciding to become a teacher myself.
Oh, wow. It's a beautiful story. A little bit traumatizing at the beginning because of what you've been through, all the physical punishment, but turn out right. I mean, you could be homeschooled, right?
Right.
And now you're a teacher. And I definitely think that you haven't done that to one of your students.
Right. Anyway, but going back to what Marina was basically saying about the importance, the cultural significance, cultural adaptation in which basically women play such a significant role. I just remembered basically the role, the transformative role that my mother basically played in my educational life, which was totally different from my home life.
Which was totally different of what, Professor?
Say that again?
It was totally different from what?
School was totally different from my home life.
Oh, yeah, okay, got you.
You know, I was supposed to socialize my mother, and that is what many immigrants do in this country, for instance, into the school culture. But definitely I was not competent or proficient enough to bring the school culture home. And in a way, by bringing home the books, probably the first book that my mother had seen, that was in Persian. So I thought that was really a transformative, basically, role. Later on, I remember she basically went to school, and she went all the way to the 2nd grade. But that was really just the level of kind of education that she had. But when she taught me how to write in Persian, she was so-called illiterate.
But let me ask you something. Does she live in Iran or here?
Unfortunately, my mother passed away 2 years ago.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And she passed away, yes, in Iran. And
in Iran?
I couldn't go back. Iran, yes.
Okay. I'm sorry.
That's fine. Thank you.